Hey guys! Welcome back to my channel. So, in today's video, I wanted to talk to you guys about growing more in a smaller space. So, I utilize both small container gardening, a more traditional small plot, high intensity gardening, and I also utilize what I called a cold compost veggie pile gardening. That is also remarkably high intensity and, in my opinion, fairly effective. So over here I have a cold compost. This compost pile does not achieve the adequate temperature for hot composting, but it gets enough sun and enough nutrients that I have a high density of cantaloupe growing at the moment. But I wanted to talk to you guys about just gardening, high intensity gardening, getting a lot of veggies in a small space. Over here is my first cold compost veggie pile. I have some failing potatoes. I've researched and I'm not entirely sure what's happening with the potatoes. I ultimately determined that it must be this location because everything else is thriving but the potatoes. In this original cold compost veggie pile, I have onions, more cantaloupe, watermelon. However, this location is not very ideal for most veggies for this type of gardening. It doesn't get adequate sun, and yet I still have plenty of things growing. Now let's go back over here. So utilizing a small space, I took leftover grass lawn clippings, leaves, some branches cut up very small, and I dug about 6 inches down, maybe a little bit more, about 6 inches down, and I filled this with my composting material, and then I had half a cantaloupe that went bad on me, and I literally just plopped that cantaloupe into this compost pile, and this became the cantaloupe cold compost pile. And I decided to place this where it gets more sun, and with regular watering I have a full-blown cantaloupe patch right here. So going back to the small container high intensity gardening patch. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was, over here I have lettuce, and I have several varieties. We have a Paris, COS, and a Grand Rapids variety of lettuce, and I started both of these from seed. And both of these are going on a month and a half at this point, and all it takes is about a month and a half, and you can already harvest and enjoy your lettuce. I planted a fairly large amount of seeds in a very small space. This is equivalent to about half or a quarter of a traditional raised container bed. And at the moment, I don't have any raised container beds, but I utilized fairly small containers and planted about 2 large rows of lettuce with both containers. And starting from seeds, I was able to grow this amount of lettuce in this tiny space. And between these 2 containers, it's more than enough for a single household. So over here, I have some spinach, some radishes, and I just harvested some of my radishes, as you can see from I harvested some of my radishes and this one as well. And over here I have my herbs container. I have parsley and I have dill. Now parsley was particularly challenging to grow, only that it seemed to take quite a long time to come to fruition. The dill came up a lot faster, but I planted a large volume in a small container, and I do regularly harvest my parsley and my dill. And I was really worried when I first started gardening this summer that these containers were going to be too small, that this wasn't going to allow me enough space. And actually, I grew so concerned. I actually had several containers with my kale that I ended up transplanting it into this small space of the lawn that I converted into a garden. I chose this space because this receives full sun, unlike the dog run area of the garden where I have the cold compost piles, and it has a walled location that actually radiates heat and helps the plants to grow between the sun, the heat, and the water. This allows for an extremely awesome growing environment. So I had my kale in the containers as well, and I had my mustard spinach, and I was worried that the containers weren't going to be big enough, and so I actually ended up transplanting my kale, my mustard spinach, and my Swiss chard out of the containers. But I'm pretty sure that they would have gone along fine in the containers had I just continued harvesting and thinning out my harvest, my produce. And I have more mustard spinach and arugula, again in the small containers. High density, high volume gardening in a very small, convenient space. And again, this is possible by starting from seeds. And oftentimes, with all of my gardening, I never had to thin out. I would simply just come in, and as soon as my produce was large enough, I just started harvesting away, and everything has been growing more and doing just fine. Now, oftentimes I notice that the containers the soil tends to dissipate somewhat. And oftentimes, if you find that the container has dissipated to an alarming level, I would suggest either transplanting it into the garden or simply purchasing a new container, filling it with soil, or say if this were to get more than halfway down, I would purchase another container. I would fill it with halfway with soil, and then I would simply transplant this into the new container so the soil level would be even with the top. And once your plants get big enough, they can easily be transplanted. In fact, with my Swiss chard, I transplanted it into the garden. And I transplanted it for several reasons. I was interested in growing some more Swiss chard, high volume, high intensity, from the container, and perhaps starting yet another row. And this had been doing really well in its container, and so I wanted to transplant it into the garden so that I could continue to do well and I could utilize that container for more Swiss chard. However, I ended up using that container to start growing some marigolds, high intensity, to transplant into an area that I want to see some marigolds in. But anyway, and I also wanted to say, when you go purchase flowers from your department store or from a nursery, don't throw these little plastic containers away. I've even begun utilizing these as a small space, high intensity gardening method. Although traditionally, I only try to place 1 or 2 seeds at most in each little 1 inch by 1 inch plot. I don't really recommend doing more than 2 to 3 seeds. But as you can see, you can grow large volumes of veggies in small spaces. And it's so easy, it's so simple, and you don't need a raised container bed to have beautiful lettuce, abundant lettuce, to have beautiful herbs, to have spinach, to have radishes. You can just simply purchase small containers, start from seed, place them in a sunny or an ideal location that the vegetable you're growing allows, or prefers, I should say, and enjoy your vegetables. Alright, thanks guys. Hey, like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Alright, thanks guys.